Alright, welcome to installment number 7 of the Introduction to Pipeband Snare Drumming. In this one we're going to go over hand-to-hand 6-stroke rolls and long 5 as well as short 5-stroke rolls, and the goal is to prepare you for massed bands scoring. Alrighty, so just as a brief, quick reintroduction, we're going to start off with the hand-to-hand 6-stroke rolls, but first we have to start off with a 13-stroke roll. So again, 13-stroke roll consists of 2 triplet buzzes and a tap. And again. So the first roll we're going to introduce here is a 12-stroke roll, and this is one where there's a lot of differentiation between the Scottish pipe band side drumming approach and the American drumming approach, and it has to do with what an accent consists of. So, in the American drumming approach, this 13-stroke roll would just be, and if you threw an accent on the front, you would just make that first double louder. On this pipe band side drumming side, it's actually a very, very different thing. Instead, that accent merely denotes that it's a tap in the same place that otherwise a roll buzz would exist. So that 12-stroke roll becomes a tap, buzz, 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 tap. And again, at full speed, and so importantly, you'll notice that that's not a loud tap. Instead, it just differentiates itself by almost being a hole where there isn't a buzz. More. And if you want, you can actually duct tape 2 of these together, and it takes up the same space as a 25-stroke roll. So this 12-12, so we'll do a 25-stroke roll first. Time. Now the 12-12, and one more time, and alrighty, so what we just did is we kind of bisected that roll with a tap in the middle. So if we apply the same thing to a 12-stroke roll, we end up with a left tap installed in the middle. So this is what the hand-to-hand 6-stroke roll consists of, and these are typically an 8th note that starts on the right hand, goes down to the left hand, and then comes back up to the right, where you'll have an accent over both of those first 2 notes. In practice, what this consists of, if you slow it down, is a tap, buzz, buzz, tap, buzz, buzz, tap. Tap, buzz, buzz, tap, buzz, buzz, tap. Or if we call it out by rudiment, it's a right 6-stroke to a left 6-stroke to a right tap. 2 and So go ahead and run over it at that speed until you're really comfortable with the movement, because each hand has a different pattern of taps and buzzes that fit in with its own separate triplet. In this case, the right hand has a tap and then 2 buzzes. The left hand has a slightly more complex pattern. It's a off buzz, then tap, and buzz up. Alright, so as we start building speed into that, it'll start off a little bit choppy. Tap, buzz, buzz, tap, buzz, buzz, tap, and 2, and tap, buzz, buzz, tap, buzz, buzz, tap. But as we start building speed into it, the last kind of goal we will build into this, after we remember that the taps are pretty light, we're not trying to smash these in, is instinctively what you would want to do to make sure it's a tap, but instead we actually put less effort into the stick, and it ends up being a much more gentle touch. Dink, buzz, buzz, dink, buzz, buzz, tap. So that's with me accentuating the stick height so it shows up over this kind of low frame rate camera. In practice, it'll look a lot more like this. And that's all. But as we start trying to build some speed into this, what we end up doing is we compress the buzzes that are next to a tap. We spread them out a little bit closer to the tap so we don't end up with a choppy motion. Instead, we want that to kind of flow a little bit more smoothly. So you can picture it in your head with whatever analogy you feel like. For my part, it's usually trying to spread peanut butter and jelly closer to the crust of the surface. You don't want to smush it over, but you want to get it up as close to that edge as you can, and then you end up with a much better sound. And 2, and one more time, and then kind of the last advanced, it's a complex detail, but once you really have it down, you can start putting a little bit of emphasis on this, is that left tap gets a little bit more weight than the other ones, just because the biomechanics works out that the left taps aren't going to be quite as loud, so we just compensate for it a little bit. And one more time. And it's as simple as that. Adding speed to that is simply just increasing the speed of the skeleton. Tap, buzz, buzz, tap, buzz, buzz, tap. Then, and then tap, buzz, buzz, tap, buzz, buzz, tap. And then all we have to do to make it line up with masked band scores and a lot of other scores that utilize the rudiment is just put in some dot and cut taps in between. So tap, 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 6 and tap, 6 and tap again. Alrighty, so that's pretty much all we need out of the hand-to-hand 6's in order to move forward with masked bands music. So the trickier ones are actually the long 5 and short 5 movements. So one of the big reasons I started off and really still emphasized the slower buzz rolls, where they're slow but linked together, is so that we can play these long 5-stroke rolls. So if you're doing the math yourself, a 5-stroke roll is nothing more than 2 buzzes, 2, 4, 5. Buzz, buzz, tap, buzz, buzz, tap. But we end up with 2 variations of this that could not be more different. The first is the long 5-stroke roll, where we actually tend to put it on a dotted 16th note, and we end up with a really slow 5. And typically we can actually put the cut note and on the end of that, which is a 32nd note, and add a left tap to the end of it. So that will occupy the same amount of space as a 7-stroke roll, buzz, 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 tap, evenly. But that long 5 tap actually is really different in 2 important ways. First is we have that distinct right tap that comes at the end of the 5-stroke roll. And importantly, and this is actually the one that you'll have to focus on to really make this rudiment work correctly, is if you watch when that left hand touches down on that first left hand buzz, it actually ends up being delayed, because instead of setting 3 evenly spaced buzzes followed by a tap, what we instead want is to have 2 longer buzzes that take up almost that same amount of time, and then 2 quick taps over here. So if we focus on delaying when that left stick touches down, and we'll have to really lean on the technique to make sure it links up, then we'll end up with a really different sound. And if you want to make sure that it sounds right, you can just play the 7-stroke roll and then the long 5 to left tap and just alternate between those just to make sure you get a really distinct different sound. One more. So the last one of these is the short 5-stroke roll, and this one is actually pretty tricky in that you almost don't even think about the buzzes that are there. So instead, the rudiment that works best to build up to it is actually just playing a fast trio of notes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, and then one more. And then we just take a lot of volume off of this. 1 and 2, and 2, last one. And then all we try to do is we just put 2 really short buzzes for those first 2 notes. And then even though I've been really focused on buzz quality to everything so far, these happen so quickly that a buzz like this, that you would think would just be terrible and useless otherwise, because if you're trying to make continuous buzzes work, that's really not good enough. But for a short 5-stroke roll, this tiny little buzz buzz is all we need. So for this one, the focus is make sure you get to the end of the 5-stroke roll. What I mean by that is you make sure you get to that tap that ends the roll. Buzz buzz tap, and then buzz buzz tap. One more. And the last kind of movement you'll see, and this is something I've borrowed from Ed Best, and his explanation of this is fantastic, but you can actually use a little bit of arm movement down so that your hands have less to do. You kind of pre-prep for the 5-stroke roll, and then you just come down. And to make that last tap work, you just use a little bit of wrist to fire off that last tap. And then, so for the actual movement that we use for the masked band's tune is the long 5 tap into the short 5. And it repeats, long 5 tap, short 5. And then the long 5 tap, short 5. And then all you have to do is play the pickup note into it, then a long 5 tap, short 5, and long 5 tap, short 5, and done. All right, so there's the 10 minutes for right now. Look forward to seeing you guys again.